Hello and welcome to Christ in Film. I'm your host, Pastor Phil. Today is Wednesday, June 24th, and whenever you're tuning in, welcome, and may God be blessing you richly in your life. Guys, today I am excited to present V for Vendetta, released in 2005, directed by James McTeague, starring Natalie Portman, Hugo Weaving, and the late, great John Hurt. It is a dystopian sort of film, and I thought that it was great casting that they brought in John Hurt to play the High Chancellor, Chancellor Sutler. As always, there are going to be spoilers in this sort of recap, and on Friday we will be having a live session to kind of unpack some of the things that we talk about first here. But as I am sort of learning how to structure and format this, this one's going to be a little bit differently structured than last week's, and so I hope that this is a little bit more helpful for you. I'm going to go through the roles and sort of how I see those roles corresponding with the roles of people in Scripture. I'm also going to go through some themes, and then finally I'm going to point out some of the times where the main Christ character is identified as being Christ, if that happens at all. Now, I chose V for Vendetta because I'd seen it before, and I have always thought it was a wonderful movie. I sort of like those dystopian, futuristic films. Blade Runner, V for Vendetta is a good one, 1984 is a good one, The Matrix is a good one. But I like these dystopian, futuristic films because there's always a hero, and that hero is usually one that doesn't really know they're a hero. In fact, they're usually anti-heroes. And V for Vendetta is sort of that way. And we'll get into those themes in just a minute, but first I want to discuss the roles. So V is a person. So V for Vendetta, if you haven't seen the film, V is a person. He is our main Christ character. Now, V is a masked character. He wears a Guy Fawkes mask. Now, this takes place in futuristic England, London in particular. And Guy Fawkes, way back in the 15th century, 1600s, something like that, he tried to bomb Parliament. And so this is a nod to a past sort of revolutionary that V wears the Guy Fawkes mask. Now, he is our Christ character. He is the one who the film sort of centers around, but it's almost a dual sort of film, because the other main character, played by Natalie Portman, is named Evey. E-V-E-Y, Evey Hammond. And we first see her in the film, and she's getting ready, and we kind of understand that she is a little bit of a rebel. She goes out past curfew, which ends up getting her in trouble and causes her to interact with this character V for the first time, because V is sort of wandering the streets and comes across Evey as she's being harassed by some of the law enforcement officials. Evey is sort of the generic Christian. If you want to find somebody in Scripture to identify her with, she'd be almost like Andrew or Peter, one of those first early adopters, people who follow Jesus no matter what, but people who you wouldn't normally pair up with Jesus, right? Evey is dainty, and she's feminine, and she works for the news agency, the propaganda agency of this dystopian regime called Norsefire, headed by Chancellor Sutler. And so for her to be in contact with V and to end up being the follower, we have to learn some more things about her, which we do. We find out that she is an orphan. We find out that her parents were part of the first wave of resistance against this regime. We find out that her brother was killed in an experiment that the regime was running, human experiments. And so she has every reason to be angry, and yet she needs to be awakened to the fact that that everything is wrong in her world. She knows that there's something kind of wrong. It's almost like Neo in the Matrix. She knows that something's wrong. She can't put her finger on it. She knows she wants to rebel, and she feels like that's the right thing to do. And yet, it's not until she meets this Christ character, V, that she realizes that there is actually someone doing something. And so she follows him. There are a couple other roles that I want to point out. Chancellor Sutler, he's the one who rises to power. And we don't see his rise to power. We just come on the scene when he is already in power. And during the film, there are a couple allusions back to how he attained power through fear, through planting diseases that caused to more fear, and establishing order and kicking out the Muslims and that sort of thing, which was kind of timely when this was filmed and released in 2005. You remember it was only 3 or 4 years after 9/11, and so that was a timely thing. Chancellor Sutler obviously represents the Satan character, or if you want to be more futuristic about it, or apocalyptic about it, he would represent the Antichrist, the one who attains power and demands for people to fall in line. And many do, and most do. Now there are 3 other characters that I want to draw your attention to. There's one who is sort of in the inner circle of Chancellor Sutler, and his name is Chief Inspector Finch. And he is kind of our Nicodemus character. So if you would imagine that, the chief priest in Scripture, Caiaphas, right? You could also make the connection that Chancellor Sutler is the chief priest, right? The head of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious order. You could make that claim because Chancellor Sutler has a sort of tribunal. I would call Chief Inspector Finch the Nicodemus character because slowly throughout the film, he starts to have his doubts about how good this party is that's taken place, how good this society is that's emerged from the chaos that's been sort of wreaked upon it. So we've got Finch, the Nicodemus character. There's also, he's sort of a very quick introduced character in the film. It's Bishop Lilliman, and he represents the Pharisees. He is well, excuse my saying this, but he's a pervert, and he takes advantage of young women, and he is paid an extreme amount of money. He's the Bishop of London, I think. But anyway, he represents the Pharisees. There has to be a religious sort of tone in the film, because I do think that they intended to make this a Christ film. Now, I'm not familiar with the graphic novels that came out in 1988, but they had to put something in there to alert us that this is an interaction with the established order and even religion. So Bishop Lilliman is the head of the Pharisees, and then there is something that's going to be controversial, and if you're watching this, chances are you are a Christian. There is a character that I believe represents Saint Paul. Now, Natalie Portman's character, Evey, is imprisoned for a large portion of the film, probably, I don't know, between halfway into the film and maybe a quarter of the way from the end. She's imprisoned, and she is sustained in her hope, in her sort of inner fortitude, by a letter that was written many, many years ago by a woman named Valerie. Now, Valerie is a lesbian, or was a lesbian, and she was arrested because she was a lesbian. And she was tortured, and she was put through these human experiments that I talked about a little bit earlier. But she writes sort of an autobiography. And the autobiography is sort of her story of how happy she was with her relationship, and how the new order under Chancellor Sutler was established when all of these diseases broke out, when wars broke out, when rumors of wars, right, famine, all these sort of things that Jesus warns us about, wars and rumors of wars and famines and droughts and all that sort of thing. All this comes out, and people flock to Sutler, and she is one of the ones that's black bagged, right? They put a black bag over her head and take her out, and she's really never heard from again, and she ends up dying in this human experiment. But her words are left on the paper that give Evie hope to maintain, to keep going through her imprisonment. And so I believe that Valerie, you might disagree with me. You might say, well, I shouldn't even bring up the sexuality part of this. Maybe I shouldn't, but the movie does. And so I believe that Valerie represents those who have gone before us as Christians, those who have a story of suffering and solidarity, those who have been oppressed for their faith. And so when Evie is reading this, it's almost as though you and I are reading a letter from the Apostle Paul or Peter, talking about that oppression, that persecution that Christians go through. So those are sort of the 6 characters that I wanted to go through. There's V and Evie, the 2 main characters, and then Bishop Lilliman, Sutler, Finch, and Valerie. Now, here's some themes for you. Now, I think that you can separate Christ films out into sort of some subgenres. This one is definitely an agent of divine wrath, kind of like Gran Torino, only to certainly a larger or greater extent. Gran Torino, it's almost redemptive, right? I put that label on Gran Torino with an asterisk. This one is definitely agent of divine wrath. V is a violent character. He is into knife fighting. He's kind of a Renaissance man, but all of the things that he does to bring good to the society, to wake people up, he does so through violence, through bombings, through killing people, through all sort of things that have to do with violence. Okay, he destroys the symbols, the human symbols of oppression, even those symbols, the propaganda symbols that make us think about liberty. When they're used by an oppressive regime, they're fakes. And so the beginning of the film, he blows up the Old Bailey, which is supposed to stand for liberty. He does so to expose the fake regime and how they're not establishing any sort of liberty. They are only in it for power and for control. There's one other thing that I think, there's a couple other things, but one thing that I think is very interesting is the choice of names, V and Evie. And I was thinking about this and I was praying about this, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but if V is the Christ character, then the choice of the name Evie, I started to think about it in mathematical terms, because E, you remember E equals MC squared, right? E is a mathematical constant. It's a logarithm that you can graph, okay? And it's a natural logarithm, which means that it's a very unique number, and it always approaches the number 1 as it goes out into infinity. So if we're to look at this as we find out that V actually equals a number. The name V stands with the Roman numeral 5. That was V's number in this experiment camp that he was a part of. And so V is a number 5. Evie approaches V, right? And so her name symbolizes this mathematical sort of truth that she starts off far away from V, as far away as you can get, and then slowly and into infinity approaches him, never actually becoming V, never actually touching V, but slowly and into infinity becoming more and more attached and united to him. Okay, I think this has huge implications, because as we call ourselves Christians, that means that we are not Christ, but we are little Christs. That means that we are slowly and into infinity growing closer and closer to him. It just kind of blew my mind when I started thinking about it like that, that V and Evie is like Christ and Christians. We always are approaching God as he calls us, right? I mean, it's not of our own power, but Christ is so gravitational that we are pulled in by him to faith, to be closer to him. And what we see in Evie is that she starts off not even like, actually being kind of grossed out by the things that fascinate V. But his favorite film is the old black and white version of Count of Monte Cristo. And at the first time that Evie watches it with him, she goes, I feel sorry for Mercedes, because Edmond Dantes is more concerned with revenge than he is concerned with his love for her. But at the end of the film, we see Evie watching and enjoying that film. I think that just means that she is starting to appreciate and love the very things that the Christ character appreciates and loves. It's kind of like you and I, right? We start off maybe disagreeing, maybe not seeing the beauty of the things that are important to God, the things that Jesus says is right and good. But as we grow closer and closer to him, we are changed so that we do enjoy the things that he enjoys. Like I said, this is a loaded Christ film, and I think that's just a really kind of an aha moment for me that I kind of stumbled upon. There's also a place where there's a baptism motif, right? Towards the end, after Evie has found out that her imprisonment was at the hands of V, in order to free her from her fear and set her free, she walks out into the rain, and she says, God is in the rain, which is something that her mom used to say to her. And so she has this baptism moment where she has been awakened, right? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14. Awake, O sleeper, rise, right? And so what we see is a juxtaposition of V sort of being baptized through fire, which is what we come to understand actually happened to him, which is why he wears the masks and the gloves and everything, because he's all burned up. And then Evie is being baptized through the water. So, like I said, I have a whole lot of notes on this, but we're already approaching the 20-minute mark. And I just want to point out to you, before we push pause on this until Friday Night Live, the Christ identification. The Christ identification in this film happens early, and it happens often. And I didn't realize it until I watched it with the captions on. The very first time that V comes on the scene, when he's rescuing Evie from the corrupt law enforcement agents, the law enforcement agent turns around and says, Jesus Christ, and is looking right at V. And so I go, oh, there it is. I think it's 5 minutes into the film. And from there on out, I think almost every one of the characters, when they see V for the first time, they either say, oh God, or Jesus Christ, or something like that, right? Something that, it's vulgar for us Christians to see that in a film, but I think that it's put there intentionally so that we see that slowly and methodically, every one of the characters identifies that this man, V, is the Christ in the film, okay? So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pause there, really, because we are going to get back into this on Friday Night Live Stream. But go on to Netflix, because it's free right now on Netflix. If you have a Netflix account, you can watch it. It's just over 2 hours. It's a wonderful film. It is certainly a Christ film, and I highly recommend it. Not for kids. It's rated R. It is super violent, but I don't think that there's many sexual motifs. If you are over the age of 16, I think that you can probably handle it. So anyway, that's V for Vendetta, the 2005 James McTeague, I think McTeague, yeah, film, and we're going to get back into it, and we're going to discuss it, and we're going to highlight some things from Abe and hopefully from Robert too this weekend or this week. And I invite you to join in. Facebook, 8 p.m. Central Time, via Link San Antonio page. That's all I have for you, but we have a whole lot more that's going to be coming your way about V for Vendetta in a couple days. May God bless you, and thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.